Greetings, everyone. You are all welcome to the International Virtual Conference on African Phenomenology and the Development Discourse. So today's conference is divided into three sections. Each session will start with a keynote address and two talks. And then we'll go for a 3 minutes break. Each speaker should please kindly note that they have 20 minutes for their lectures, and I beg us to stick to time so that we'll have ample time for Q&A. While joining this conference, I employ us to mute ourselves, and during the Q&A, please keep your question or contribution or comment very brief. So at this point, my name is Amara Esther Chimakunam. I'm a postdoc at the Center for African Phenomenology, University of Fort Hare, South Africa. And I'm the organizer of this conference, and I'll be your host for today. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge my host, Professor Abraham Olivier, who is the director of the Center for African Phenomenology, University of Fort Hare, at the University of Fort Hare, South Africa. So, Prof, you are welcome to this event. So, without taking much of our time, I would like to call the first speaker. But before I do that, kindly note that the bio of each speaker will be pasted on the chat box, including the abstracts of each lecture for today. So I will just give a brief introduction of each speaker and they move straight to what they have to tell us for today. So our first keynote address for today is titled The Progressive and Social Developments in Crisis-Torn Societies, Perspectives from African Phenomenology. Our speaker is Dr. Joseph Agbo from Ebonyi State University, Nigeria. Doc, we are happy to have you here. Please speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Amara Esther, and thank you for inviting me to this conference. I am very glad to participate in this global discussion. I also thank the guests or the speakers who we are going to be I'm going to be listening to during this discussion. My paper is titled The Progressive and Social Development in Crisis-Torn Societies, Perspectives from African Phenomenology. And one of the things that excites me about this conference is that I love application. I'm an applied ontologist and applied phenomenologist. I believe that for those of us who are concerned about African research, African discussion, or issues relating to Africa, philosophizing for the sake of philosophy is a luxury, and a luxury that is both unnecessary and unaffordable for those of us who are involved in that kind of discussion. So I am so glad that this conference is applying African phenomenology to the issues, the challenges that Africa has been faced with, especially the challenges relating to development. And I have decided that we should look at this area because peace is an inevitable factor when it comes to development. No place, no society can really develop without peace. And we cannot have peace that is absolute. But notwithstanding the fact that we cannot have absolute peace, we also do not think, we believe that no society can develop if that society is thrown into or torn in pieces or torn into pieces by crisis. And so we want to look at the idea of African phenomenology. Of course, a lot of people, incidentally, I think it was Abraham Olivier's essay that I read, African phenomenology. What is that? And it looks funny. It's like asking African philosophy. What is that? Because if we are going to have African philosophy, then there is no reason why we cannot have African phenomenology. Because if we understand phenomenology as dealing with the lived experience of a people or a person, then you know that it is a critical factor, especially realizing the fact that we have to do things that will engender development in Africa. And Africa has had to struggle with developmental issues, especially when it comes to the continent. Now, this paper gave a different or decided to give a phenomenological interpretation of the progressive away from the normal political conception that we have had over time. Okay. Um, this paper conceived the progressives as subjects, conscious subjects, who are, because of their lived experience within their society, steeped in the cultural respiration of that society. And that's what makes them, because they are lived engagers, they are involved in the development or existing in that society, they now, as a result, get involved in doing things that will ensure that that society develops. And we have used this paper decides to use the challenge posed by crisis or turn crisis within that society to look at how they can employ their conscious involvement, conscious lived experience within that society to ensure that this crisis is mitigated and then to ensure that development is ensured. We discovered that the challenges facing Africa, especially within those who are within the continent, has to do basically with consciousness of what is happening within their territory. And we believe that consciousness is also the consciousness of crisis. Their consciousness of crisis is very critical in understanding that society. And if they do, then they will be able to create the atmosphere upon which those crises can be mitigated. And we discovered also that if the progressive, because of their consciousness of the issues, their lived engagement and involvement within the society, decides to intervene, and this progressive, like we have conceived in this paper, does not have to be a leader. What is critical is that that person is steeped in the cultural respiration of the society and he is able to understand that society better. Because part of the challenges we have had in Africa is the crisis of, do I call it interaction? The clash between consciousness of things coming from outside and consciousness of the traditional or autochthonous African society. So these people observe that there are, within African societies, the challenges are completely different because there is no society in Africa that is essentially the way it was in its original Africanity. And so you now see that these clashes will now involve that a particular set of people will need to be alert, consciously alert, to be able to address these issues. I cite one example. For example, when you come to the Nigerian society, for example, the Supreme Court in Nigeria has ruled or judged that women should, inherit their father's property. But how many people within our societies are still able to implement that decision? something that was a biological right of women has now been provided for legally because it was as a result of social stratification that that right was denied. But you see that this clash between the national law and the original cultural law will need to be handled carefully. Otherwise, you see women who, a lot of women are even afraid to ask for it because they are afraid that the society will not see their request as very genuine. That's just one example. And so when you see these challenges facing the African society, you now find out that a phenomenological mindset is very, very critical to ensuring that this crisis is mitigated, because this paper looks at crisis as essentially something that is coming from inside. The consciousness of what? What do you have consciousness of? And to what extent is that consciousness, which is what we discuss when we discuss intentionality. And so the African lived experience is very, very important if we understand it. And that's why I said my excitement is the fact that we are trying to look at our challenges, employing the African phenomenological attitude. Since it is for us who are Africans, we need to understand the nature of our lived experience, especially with the clash from other cultures. Now, what we did was to look at African phenomenology, discuss what is it, and then we also looked at what does it mean for a society to be, what is social development. We looked at social development in this essay, and then we also proceed to discuss on what ground, what are the bases, what are the indices that make a society crisis torn, disputes, and there's a word I'm trying to look for. The disputes and challenges that face a society can sometimes snowball into crisis. Conflicts, that's the word I'm looking for. Conflicts that are not easily handled can lead to crisis. And this crisis, when they increase in number, they can become a whole lot of challenge for the society, and development will certainly be hindered. And my interest here is to ensure that we actually apply what we have been doing in the past 3 decades in African phenomenology. I was reading Lewis, what's in his first name now, and he said that African phenomenology began in the past has been on in the past 3 decades. And so for us, we need to apply what we have been studying to our challenges within Africa. And that's why I am interested. The convener, I'm not surprised because your husband has been used to breaking new vistas. So you are ensuring that we too on that line. And I'm very grateful again for ensuring that you bring me to participate in this conference. This work in progress. We'll be able to see what roles conscience can play in ensuring that the society lives crisis condition, and as a result bring about development. And as somebody who has been involved myself in development discussions, I have a few things to do. Thank you.
Call from Dr. J.
Thank you very much.
Crusaders iPhone 12 Pro Max disconnected.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that I've been able to say a few things that will make us think about the areas that I had been talking about. I don't want phenomenology in Africa or African phenomenology to get into what A.C. Grayling called the sort of things that salaried professors do in their self-styled attempt to, to be relevant, just for us to write and publish and get promotions. No, for me, philosophy should be useful for those of us who are in Africa. When Chimakaman talks about defending a position, for example, or proving a point or defending a territory, I do not want African phenomenology to continue on that trajectory, because when, for example, you think about the question of shifting the geography of reason, and I'm like, in my head, I just begin to imagine that was reason really domiciled in the north? And if we get involved in this discussion, are we now imagining that actually it is our contributions in conferences or what we write on essays that have actually shifted reason to the south? The truth is no. Reason has always been a prerogative of anywhere there is humanity. And that's why I am interested in ensuring that African phenomenology gets involved in actual addressing of issues within the continent, issues that cause challenge for communities, either as small communities, and what I'm discussing in this paper can apply both to any small community or to the larger nation states. Once we have a group of people who are steeped in the cultural respiration because of their lived experience, because of the fact that they have been participating and involved in the issues within that society, then African phenomenology will now, for me, begin to get into real discussion or real issues, and then seeing how we can, because at the end of the day, it is the human beings in Africa and the African environment that will be interested in ensuring that we live well, so that it's not every time we always go looking for what I could call handouts from outside Africa or from outside the African cultural environment. And so for us, these issues are very critical when it comes to how crises are resolved in Africa. And I wanted to tell us a story in the beginning. Many years ago, maybe 40 years ago, two people had a problem in my community, Neke, in the local government in the state of Nigeria. And the problem got to a critical point that it was serious crisis that the international. So he invited the two families for a meeting. And on the day of the meeting, one of the families decided to hold an inter-family meeting of their own to discuss what they will say when they get to the meeting. And as they were discussing the issues at the home of the eldest man, the man, at a point, it was getting to the time the Igwe asked them to come. And suddenly the man stopped them and asked them a question. He said, this meeting questions that have not been asked, or to say things about something that you have not heard. Why not, when you get there, if you see what is said, then you now provide response. On that note, they dispersed and the delegates headed for the Igwe's palace. Now, the eldest man Osu has just displayed a phenomenological mindset by saying you need to keep an open mind. You need to be presuppositionless about things in reality, especially when it has to do with crisis. Why do you have to start deciding on what you will answer How many questions are you going to ask? Do you know the question that will come from the other side? Do you know the statement that will come from the other side? Why don't you wait? Afoku, afosisaya. When you see the word, when you see the statement, then you can now provide a response. That, for me, that eldest man called Oso has just displayed the typical phenomenological mindset that is very useful and critical for the resolution of crisis. And so it's not, I cited this example to show that phenomenology is not an exclusive preserve of any race. It appears and it is there in anywhere where there are human beings and their lived experiences, within the context, what Heidegger will call world, or Merleau-Ponty will call situation, and Sartre will call field. Sorry, Sartre will call situation, and Merleau-Ponty will call field. So within that world, within that field, within that situation, there will always be people, progressive minded, who are steeped in the cultural respiration of that society. And as a result of their lived experience, they are able to intervene when crisis attempts to tear the society into shreds. Because with that kind of situation, no society can develop. Like I said, I have been involved in this kind of thing for several years, and I have seen the advantage of having that phenomenological mindset where you consciously, deliberately, intentionally seek for solutions to the problems facing your society and how they can, at the end of the day, if addressed to a reasonable extent, provide a platform, a veritable enabling condition for development within that society. Of course, we also looked at development in this paper. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your thought-provoking lecture. It was really insightful. So before we open up the Q&A session for this lecture, we will take the two remaining lectures for this section. So